a little bit and show kind of the breadth and the depth of bonsai in different ways. For those of you who are beginners and new to the club, take advantage of the club. Your learning opportunities are extremely high here. I travel around the country, and a lot of clubs I go to, what San Diego Bonsai Club provides you guys is a standard above most all clubs around the country. Get in, get your hands dirty, jump in, take the classes, take the workshops. The way you learn the best is getting in and starting to do it. And you'll see today that then your focus will change, because once you get your basics down, once you get comfortable with the techniques of pruning, of wiring, of trimming, of pinching, and you understand that stuff, the rest of your entire life in bonsai will be spent learning about the different kind of trees you want to work on. So jump in, get those basic skills, get comfortable with them, so you can really then focus on your good learning. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. So I brought in a whole mixed bag of stuff, and what I thought is we talk about a bunch of different varieties of trees, some of which folks will know about, maybe some will be a little surprising to others. But again, it shows some of the breadth of what we can do in bonsai. So, you know, we all know bonsai to be, you know, our standard junipers, our pines, our elms, maples. I mean, you know, you read any Japanese book and you can kind of see all the classic materials. But we're lucky we live in an environment, a location where we can really grow a lot of material. We don't have to fuss with overwintering and storage and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of places I go, if somebody buys a tree, they have to get rid of the tree because they have a greenhouse or cold storage that's got X amount of space and you just can't expand that. Well, we can kind of grow bonsai with infinitely growing collections because, again, we just don't have to worry about that. But there's a lot of material that's kind of fun to use. And what I have here is a variety of privet. This is a variety of English privet. There's also a Taiwan privet that's also got very small leaves, but these are slightly different than the wax leaf Texas or Japanese privet that you see in the landscape. Those are also very good for bonsai. But these little English privets, and some you can get variegated ones, really make sweet little trees. Now this is still in a training pot. This is not in the final bonsai pot for this guy. Working, reducing them down. But one of the reasons these guys make great bonsai subjects is their root system. The root system is similar to a boxwood. It's nothing but fine strength. So as you take a plant from the ground, as you take it from a can, you can definitely reduce it down quite a bit. So again, I took this from this size of a container and got it into this size of a container, and I'll grow it in here for about a year, maybe 2 years possibly, and it will be reduced to the container that fits inside this one. So you can really get these guys knocked down. You'll notice the leaves are pretty small too, and the leaves will further reduce. You know, you can get them so that if you go through leaf plucking, you can get rid of big leaves and just keep getting the leaves smaller and smaller and smaller. So by the end of a season, they can really get into scale. They're a broadleaf evergreen. And if you notice, the stem itself has a green tone to it. So it produces chlorophyll. It's able to photosynthesize. So that means you can take privets and you can cut them to nothing. You can cut them to a stub, no problem. Now this guy, still working on the structure a little bit here. And so you can see I've stubbed some areas back. I've got some nice budding in a couple spots. And so I think maybe there's an opportunity at this stage to do something different. So for example, one area we could do a little bit more drastic work on this tree is by taking this big lump here off. Now that's a cutting too. Privets start very easily from cuttings. So again, they're good material. You can find the English privet, the small leaf privet in nurseries. You know, that's something that has really changed though. You know, since we've gone through our droughts and there's been so much emphasis on xeriscaping, a lot of standard nurseries don't carry the materials that we used to be able to walk in and find. How often do you go into nurseries and find junipers, like from procumbens to prostratas? Again, they just aren't even used in the landscape that much anymore, so you go to your local nursery and a lot of what used to be very available to us is no longer there because, again, people aren't putting them in their landscapes. But stuff like this, people are still able to use. So again, I've got one other little lump in here, and we're just getting rid of some of this coarse stuff, going to a little finer growth. And so now, I can do just a little trim here, a little trim here. And so now I got this guy set up to stay a true Shito-sized tree. So I like Shohin, I like Mame, but I also, when I have opportunities, I like Shito trees too. So again, this will go into a smaller pot. But you notice by simplifying the line, taking those extra coarse things off of there, we're really back down to very basic structure here. Trunk comes out at an angle. We've got a first branch coming off the outside of the curve. We've got a nice back branch here. This bud, that's the one I was waiting to form to make this nice side branch. So, and you can see I've got little buds sprouting all over, which I'll have to go rub off. But getting down to those very basics like this, you can do that with little privets like this. And this guy will sprout out. This has been out on my bench. It was 115 Friday at my place. It was 107 yesterday. And no burn, you know, no reaction. So again, here's a couple cuttings if anybody wants. But here's some of this same privet. Now you can see this guy. He got some leaves crisped up here. But if you look, even under where the leaves were crisped up, there's already new buds pushing. So again, it can do a little reaction to the heat, but it also recovers pretty good. I've got a lot of spent leaves in here, and I'm going to just take those off so we can kind of see a little bit more what the structure is. Spent leaves are the leaves that were sitting on the tree protecting a bud, and now the bud has sprouted. So the leaf has already done its job. It's used up its real purpose, so they can typically be removed. Now for these little guys, what makes that nice is you constantly take these big leaves off, and the tree constantly gives you smaller and smaller leaves. So again, let's just start pruning down here. One of the things on privets that you have to be aware of, and you're going to be fighting a lot, is they love to throw vertical buds. This is one of the varieties, one of the species that will give you 3 vertical buds for every lateral bud it pushes out. So what you have to do, so like look at this tip. See how that just came right directly off the top. And so what you have to do is you got to be relentless at keeping those off. At some point, typically right after you take a vertical, you'll get a little bud right at the base, and it'll tend to be more lateral. So one of the secrets to working on a variety like this is you've got to be more persistent than the tree, because this tree will constantly be throwing verticals up. So what you have to do is you just have to say, I'm not putting up with that at all, and you just have to be relentless and keep knocking these guys back. This privets, as you know, grow into great hedge material. So in the landscape, you know, they just get denser and denser and denser the more they're pruned. Well, again, same thing. When you really stay on top of these and prune them frequently, they get denser and denser and denser twigging too. The other cool thing is this small leaf variety of privet in our winters, and it might be a little bit different here in San Diego because you're a little more temperate even than I am, but these guys will go about 90% dormant. But what I've done with my privets in the past, and I have a 3-trunk tree at home, I will actually go strip the leaves off, and I've shown that tree as a winter silhouette before. And so it shows very well that way. So again, I could cut all of these guys to where there are no leaves and just cut it to sticks, and the whole tree would bud out. But because it's a broadleaf evergreen, one of the things you have to be aware of is if you cut some of these stems to bare wood and you leave leaves on some other stems, Sometimes the bare stems won't bother sprouting again because all the food factory is being run by the remaining leaves. So if you're going to be really, you need to be really drastic on these. Don't be afraid of it, but take everything off and just start from stem growth, and you'll be okay. Now, one of the things I'm noticing in here, this guy was kind of tucked out of the way. I do have a lot of scale I'm noticing on these old leaves here. So this tree is going to go in the raffle, so whoever takes this home, make sure when you get home you give it a spray because you don't want to spread the scale to your other plants. There's another tree that I brought here too that I noticed has a little scale, but it's also going through a bark exfoliation, so a lot of the scale is being just sloughed off with the exfoliating bark. Again, as you see, as we start getting rid of some of these big gross leaves, all of a sudden a tree structure will start coming in here. So never be afraid of these guys of constantly taking this stuff off. And you can see even in the heat, this is right in the middle of sprouting and new sprouts are just fine. This is an opposing bud tree. So you will, again, that's one of the things that contributes to the vertical buds is your buds will come out this way, this way, this way, this way. And if you trim back to buds like this, the one on the top is going to shoot straight up. So we try and prune to buds that are on the side. If you have to prune to verticals, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll prune, and then what I'll do is I'll just rub the bud off. And that way I'll try and get the little bud at the base of the leaf and even scrape that a little bit and prevent that from even forming and just keep forcing this out. If you are persistent, you will really get a beautifully laid out extended branch structure on these guys. And you will really, by your frequent pruning, you will develop a beautiful little twig system. So let's adjust a few things, get a little more movement coming in on a couple of these guys. Get rid of a couple of these big leaves. When you take leaves off of a tree like this, what it does is it gives you a more massed rebud. You don't get just buds on the tips, but you will get buds pushing everywhere. So you can develop a tree like this and not see a lot of twigging, and all of a sudden, in like one pruning, the whole thing will explode with buds. You'll see my soils for all these guys are my standard 3-part bonsai mix, but one of the things for my little pots, I use particle size to govern water retention. So you'll see there's some big particle in there, but there's actually a larger mass of finer particles in that guy. Big leaves just tuck away, you don't see them. But by taking them off, all of a sudden what should start showing up here again is more of a true tree structure. So we've got a little clump or possibly a little raft here. So they're conjoined trunks. Now, this is going on the raffle, so this would actually be kind of an unusual little tree because again, they do have this common base. It isn't really a raft in the sense that the side branches laying down haven't produced their own root. It's still off the main root. This is also something, if somebody decided, well, gee, I don't know if I like the clumps here, this would be one of those trees that you could really amortize in the sense that you could take this home, you could take all of these little trunks off, the excess ones, propagate them, make new cuttings, and then say maybe the one main line off that base. And start reducing that down, eventually getting it, again, something like this. So a lot of possibilities within a little guy like this. And again, this was just something that was self-propagated at one time. But see, by taking the large leaves off, all of a sudden, space comes out in the tree, and it opens up, so it starts having more of a tree proportion. So again, this will go on the raffle. But do not discount the dwarf leaf privets. And again, though that's a variety, you will still find in some landscape nurseries. You can find them in 1 gallon, you can find them in 5 gallon even. And a lot of times if you see the privets in 5 gallon, they'll be a clump. And don't fight it. They make beautiful natural little clump trees. The bases really lend themselves to that. So don't be afraid to push that in that direction. Now, I'm going to pull up a second tree here. This is a little different variety of tree. Probably not too many people have probably seen these, but you'll see other varieties of these. This is a variety of Eleaegnus. So the common Eleaegnus, the silverberry, very popular as a bonsai subject, works very well. You see a lot of silverberry in Japan. When I went there 10 years ago, I was surprised how many Eleaegnus I saw in bonsai nurseries, and really beautiful ones, a lot of Shohin. Well, this variety is called Eleaegnus Multi-Floral. And what it is, it's a more dwarf variety. So the standard silverberry, it gets a very leathery leaf with a silver undercoat. This leaf is a little more delicate. It's a little more papery. It doesn't get quite as hardened. It tends to stay a little smaller. This variety too also produces a small fruit, but this, instead of the standard Eleaegnus, which just gets brown, this will actually produce a little red fruit. Now, these guys, I have not gotten these to fruit. This is one I've been working on for a while. And mostly working to, one, reduce the root mass, and two, to produce a nice, dense branch to twig system in here. Now this guy, I thought I was going to have this in a bonsai pot this year. You know, this came off a 5-gallon can. It's been reduced over a course of 2 or 3 repottings. I thought it was going to go into a bonsai pot as a Shohin or Kifu tree this year. Well, when I got it out of the training pot, and I'd really reduced heavy root mass back before. But what there was there was a heavy root mass, but there was a lot of roots coming above what was the natural nabari, or the natural line of root break. They were kind of coming out of folds up here, and I had these big heavy roots, but I had these fine ones just laying over them. So in my first repotting, because I took so much of the bottom stump off, I ended up leaving those roots feeding into the tree to keep it alive. Well, this year, when I went into the tree, that original place where I cut had actually calloused, and roots were coming out of that now. So rather than put this in a bonsai pot, since I had that lower area that rooted out, it was a good chance for me to go clean up and remove all those roots coming higher into the trunk. So I put this back into just a training pot 1 more year. You'll see I've got bamboo laid on this because what I wanted below that bamboo is a whole nother flare of root mass. And so I wanted to make sure that the lower portion where that was cut was well down in the soil. And you know, it's doing really well. After the repot, I let it blow out, and I went a couple weeks ago and did my prunings, and sure enough, within 10 to 14 days, boom, this guy's exploding with growth again. It's not ready to prune right now, though. It hasn't extended, hasn't hardened off. If I were to come and prune this now, I'd be pruning just some of the same stuff just back closer. But again, I'm letting this guy push out. You'll notice when you observe your trees, you really start getting some clues as to what you can do with them. So like this guy, over the years I've observed that it's able to throw sprouts right off the heavy bark portion of the trunk. So again, it's a broadleaf evergreen. So at times I have just whacked this back to where there hasn't been a leaf on it. But if I do, now that I've got structure that I'm trying to preserve, again, you'll notice some branches like here. When I pruned this branch, this was the last leaf on it. There was some stem in here that, again, I've got bud nodes, but because it was a broadleaf evergreen, I only cut it to this point, to where there was a leaf on it. Because had I cut that particular stem a little further, it's possible that wouldn't just wouldn't have even bothered to rebud out. Now that I've got this bud on the end, this bud right back in here, right behind, is actually active now too. Where a few weeks ago when I pruned this, there was no bud showing there. There's actually a bud present there now. So the next time, when my length extends, not quite this far, but when my length extends and when I prune it, I'll actually be able to go and cut that back harder the next time because now the bud is present there. So again, understanding the material allows me to, with a more sure hand, develop the branch and twig system here in a predictable fashion. Okay? Now, this little Eleaegnus too. Now you can see, this is Friday. These crispy leaves, this guy was sitting out, and so that was just Friday. I had this protected yesterday and stuff, but boys, I mean, in Pasadena, in people's yards, there are whole shrubs, like whole camellias, that in one day turn just brown, just crisped up. It really is nasty up there. We're going to have an ugly landscape. Even in the Huntington, I went in the afternoon the last couple of days to check on things and do some, like, you know, emergency watering. And yeah, there's big shrubs too, big camellias that are just brown and crisp, just from a day or two. Nasty. So, getting back to this guy. This guy, again, it's showing a little stress, but we're kind of beyond that stress point. So, when I discovered these, and whoever takes this home is going to get a nice weed collection to go along with it. I had gotten a couple of these from a nursery up in Sacramento a few years ago. It's actually the Maruyama nursery near the river down there. And when I discovered these, I've done a couple workshops with these, and so this one and this one are kind of the leftovers. And this wasn't too much a couple years ago, but actually just in letting it grow out, it started to develop some structure in here. Now, there's some things that when you do a blowout, you've got to be aware of. And what's going to happen is some of your proportions are going to change. So you notice, if you look inside, there's some twigging in here that dried up, just no longer functioning. So a couple of years ago, I had a situation where I blew out my left bicep, and I found that if I tried to do anything, it was too much. So for an entire year, I forced myself to do nothing to my trees, because if I go out working, I'd start lifting, I'd start tearing things. So a lot of my trees just got this grow out. They were all healthy, they grew, and they all got bushy, so again, they weren't suffering that way. But after the year, when I got back and I had some students come and we did a trimming blitz to kind of catch up to my trees, one of the things when we trimmed everything back, I had a proportion of twigging in all my bonsai that I developed over a long period of time that I lost in 1 year. Because all that interior twigging, once my ends blew out like this, there were some of those fine twigs in there that didn't have the vigor. They pushed leaves, but what happened is this mass grow out produced such a dense canopy of foliage out here, light stopped getting in, and all of a sudden my trees went from this proportion to this proportion. So what it's going to take for my bonsai to really get looking good is a couple of years of getting rid of all those coarse tips, rebudding them and replacing them with new twigging. So if you do your blowout, you can kind of lose control out of some structures. So for this guy, what we need to do is we need to come in and we need to first just clean up the line. So, this had been pruned. I hadn't really paid too much attention to it. And so, I haven't really done a lot. I've got ants on this, so I'm guessing I probably got scale on this guy too. So again, sorry about that, but whoever gets this, that'll be something you're going to want to take care of this. I do spray, but you know, when it's been so hot, I was a little reluctant even to spray these guys before bringing, because I didn't want an oil spray or something to all of a sudden create a burn. What I would do though, in treating something like this now, I would spray my oil late in the afternoon, and I would probably leave that tree in shade for 1 full day, and then start bringing it out. So let's start working on just cleaning up some line in here, reproportioning a few things. One of the things I'm taking old stubs off. That's something I do typically on a regular basis. Cleaning old stubs is one of the ways I get an idea of how my tree performed that well. So what I'm talking about is, see right here along this trunk, see that where this stub was left? When that was cut, it caused this stem to go out. Well, then I cut it here, it caused this stem to go out. Then I cut it here. So everywhere that I cut and left a little safety margin of a stub, those stubs I haven't gone to clean off there. Now in some cases those can look like false twigs on a tree, but they aren't. They're too uniform, and they often end with a blunt tip. So you will recognize the lack of good character in them after a while, and at some point you'll go in and go, those don't even look natural. I need to go and get those off of there. Again, this Eleaegnus, you'll notice there are verticals here as well. This isn't as persistent a vertical grower as the Privet though. You will get better layouts on this. But by cleaning up this line, what we do is we guide the eye toward more useful, valuable elements of these structures. So by taking the stubs off, one of the byproducts is we're left with curves. We're left with, you know, softer movements. We're not left with these very abrupt, sharp movements, which indicate youth. We're left with these softer curves that, again, indicate age. They're much more expressive of age. So as we clean up the line, we actually get a more tree-like appearance. Now this guy too, it's got some dead, ooh, there's under that bark, there we got tons of mealybugs sitting in here, so we'll get rid of that stuff. That's one of the reasons we got ants on here, no wonder, yuck.
How many plants are you working on?
Pardon?
How many plants are you working on?
Right here?
In your collection?
Oh, I still have way too many. I still have well over 100 trees at home. You know, for all the years I've done programs and workshops and stuff too, I've also, you know, kind of just had in essence, a nursery at home. And I'm cutting down on a lot of that kind of stuff. So I've gotten rid of some of my blocks of things. You know, like I'd have 10 of something, 8 of something. Well, slowly over the years I've eliminated that. So now let's do just a little better proportioning on this. A little better cleanup here. We'll save that. That could be a little piece of dead wood. Now here, on this line, we've got this lateral branch coming out, but you notice that's the heavier of these. And we got this nice guy coming up right there. I want to give that more of the vertical line on this and make that more of an apical spot off this trunk. And then we've got this guy back here. Well, this is in a nice location. It's a little more central, so we can make this the more dominant trunk. We'll keep this a little higher, but I don't want this little sucker coming through here and kind of ruining the proportion on me. Okay, and then even here, I'm going to look at about there. So there's our two biggest proportions. So let's come back in, and now what we're going to do is now we're going to come in and we're going to force budding. Now in this case, we're going to be aggressive with taking everything off. So whoever takes this home, you put this out in sun, you just keep it moist, and what will happen is this thing will just explode with new growth. But for the time being, we're going to take everything off. So we really do get a good heavy bud break with this. So again, for you beginners, you know, to look at somebody come in and kind of with the weather we've been having and stuff and just start whacking on a tree like this, that could be a little intimidating. You know, if somebody handed you a scissors and then go to it, oh boy, that's scary. But that's part of knowing your species, is to be able to recognize when you can get away with something, to understand your plant to the degree that when you come in and cut like this, you're doing it without a sense of trepidation, because you know this guy will resprout. So now what we're going to do, a little too low here, a little too low, not a good line here, and we got a crotch guy coming up right here we don't really want. But what I am going to do, I'm going to put one piece of wire on this in order to bring this one line into a slightly more dominant position. So for beginners, when you use aluminum, there's a great test. If you're not sure, you give yourself about 3 inches. See, the branch is moving more than the wire, so it's going to work. I know it's strong enough to hold that. And again, we're probably going to get this guy up a little bit too. So I'm trying to think at the moment, can I use one piece of wire to control 2 branches? So what I'm going to do is we're going to come like in here. Oh, sure enough. Now wiring, again for you beginners, that's an intimidating task. First time you sit down to wire, it's going to feel so awkward. It's just going to, you're just going to be going, wow, this just doesn't even feel natural. But stick with it. Wiring is an essential skill in bonsai. The more you practice it, the better you'll get. Ryan Neal talks about wire really to a bonsai artist. It's like the paintbrush for a painter. It's what allows you to actually apply the paint to the canvas. For beginners, impatience will kind of, you'll feel like, oh gosh, this is just taking forever. You'll see people wiring and they'll make it look easy, and you'll wonder, gosh, why is it so tough? Again, it just takes the practice to do so. When I first moved to Southern California, I found another guy who was a bachelor like me, and we became bonsai buddies. And at the time, we used to go out like to Moore Park out in Ventura County, and they have all these huge wholesale nurseries out there. And we both had little pickups, and we go out on a Saturday and we just fill our pickups up. And I mean, 1 gallon stuff was like $1.99, 5 gallon was $3.99. You just find tons of stuff. And Sunday, we'd get together at either one of our houses, and we'd go through that pickup loop. We'd be pruning and wiring, repotting. We killed a lot of trees and stuff. But what it did is it took the fear of working on bonsai away. And that's something you have to overcome when you get into it. You're going to have some fears. You're going to have fear of pruning a tree, because you're going to think, gosh, if I cut this thing off, I'm going to somehow damage it. There's going to be fear of repotting. Same thing. You're going to feel like, oh man, if I go in after those roots, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to kill it for sure. There's a fear of wiring, and a lot of it is because it's so intimidating. You look at a tree, all the branches go in various directions. It's just like a puzzle, and it's like staring at that blank piece of paper before you put that first color on it. It's like that is the most intimidating moment of creativity right there. Once you touch the paper, you change it, now you've got stuff to react to. Same in bonsai. But when you're learning, and you're getting involved, take your time and learn your skills. You notice even like when I was doing my wiring here, I was supporting one loop, I move my support hand. One loop, move my support hand. One loop, move my... Think in those types of terms, and you'll find that your success rates will go up. Now, see how we brought that in a more dominant position? Now, this design, we've got flow to it. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trunks. Oh, a nice odd number. That kind of works out kind of nice. I think probably this is the front in here because there's some nice dead wood to be worked and designed and broken. I'll leave that to the winner of this. But you notice this flow, short side, long side. So this is from my perspective, a left to right composition. From your perspective, it would be the opposite. But again, by pruning, by just, letting this guy grow out, pruning it hard, letting it grow out, pruning it hard, develop just this little clump from what was really skinny little stems, all of a sudden it gets some substance and structure and stuff. So these Eleaegnus, again, they're a tree that for us can take our weather. So these, you saw the little bit of crispiness? These guys are out in pretty much full sun. Late in the afternoon, my yard is real hot. I don't have any trees to the west. So my shade cloth is more curtains, so that in the late afternoon, when it's really built up with a lot of heat, that's when my trees are getting a little protection. But when it's overhead, they're getting it pretty good. And like I say, a little bit of burn on some tips here, but for the most part, this is pretty tough. These broadleaf evergreens too, another thing about them is, say if you really got just your leaves all trashed out here, defoliate them, boom, they'll sprout out again on you. So again, that's not something you have to worry about. But again, you can be very aggressive at the roots here. Where you can almost take these back as cutting stock and let them reroot. So in terms of getting them into a nice small pot, they're kind of ideal for that. Okay? Any questions on? Yes?
So when in this heat situation, the trees are sort of browning, the leaves are browning up and everything, and you're perfectly thinking that you need to refoliate, you would advise to trim the end of the shoots as well, correct?
Yes, I do both, John, on these.
And you would take that opportunity in order to bring it back in to encourage the buds that are dormant still to pop close to the stronger trunks.
Exactly. And one of the things too that when you have like weather damage, you will find that the tree will react almost like a defoliation. I mean, it's like nature is doing the work. Another thing that can happen, don't be surprised, when we get in these periods of intense heat, don't be surprised if all of a sudden our temperatures break and we cool off a little bit. Don't be surprised to see a whole generation of foliage in your trees turn yellow and slough off. It's almost like they're holding a mass of old leaves as a defense against the extreme heat. And the minute that pressure is off, they just release and will do a big leaf drop. So don't get too caught up by that. It was so hot that even our native junipers are turning, like how you get your browning, your lignifying back here, and then you get green foliage. Well, that one internode space just behind those tips, boy, there's a lot of native junipers that have a lot of that browning in there right now too, and I can only attribute that to the heat because it's something that came on very quickly. So you got to watch that. But some of these guys are surprisingly tough. So, this little leathery quality of the leaf, it makes it be able to withstand some of those temperatures and some of that intensity. So again, part of the understanding is really, learning about the species of tree. Learning, and so like when I got this group of trees, I lived with them for a while. just watching them grow, studied them and stuff like that. And so again, they worked out. Not all do. I've experimented with some plants that after a while just didn't. I kept fighting, you know, some trees, for example, only want to keep breaking a terminal bud. And, you know, it'll keep breaking a terminal bud, and you'll only get one stem. You know, sometimes you'll trim a tree and 2 buds will form, but 1 will give up and just 1 will take off. So what you get is you get extension, and because you're pruning, you get extension with movement. But sometimes you don't see the back budding. When our trees go from, say, nursery containers or ground growth, and we start putting them in a bonsai mix, one of the things that happens is we change the quality of the root mass. So we start creating a finer, hair-like feeding root system. As that fine feeder root system fills the pot, the metabolism on the top of the tree changes. And it almost seems like happening, even if you have one of those like single lead type of tendencies, once you get a fine root system really compacted in a pot, it always seems like, boy, one time you'll cut it, and instead of getting the terminal, now, boom, you get several buds coming out. And it's almost like you're fighting it, but then, boom, the tree rewards you one time. Now I've got another little oddball here. This is a Mexican guava. Definitely part of the guava family, and we do guavas with strawberry guavas, pineapple guavas and stuff. But this was something. This is an interesting tree in that in 2008, when the economy crashed, landscaping, you know, stopped, construction stopped. And so what happened is a lot of the big nurseries really were hurting. And so starting in 2008, we started hearing rumors of these big nurseries up in Simi Valley and again the Ventura County wholesale nurseries, that they just stopped watering things and they were just giving plants away. So there was a group of guys from San Sui Kai went up, and man, they came back with tales of you could get 15-gallon oaks with trunks this big for like 10, 15 bucks. I mean, pennies on the dollar. So people were just making exoduses up for these big nurseries. So I went, you know, 2009, 2010 as well. Well, by that time, the oaks were pretty much gone. But as I'm looking through this, it was called the All-American Nursery. I'm walking through, and here's this whole row of plants. They didn't have foliage, but boy, they had these really interesting model trunks. And I thought, oh, here's a whole bunch of, you know, little crepe myrtles and stuff. So I grabbed a bunch of them. They were sitting just out in the nursery under a rainbird, but they were very dry. They were alive. And so I got these just for, I mean, a buck a piece, I think, and I got, I don't know, 15, 20 of them. And I brought them home, and I just stuck them, you know, I thought maybe I'd play with them, I'd whack them. And so I started playing with these guys, and I started whacking them and pushing them back and stuff like this. So this, you can see, again, they're back budding. But this is kind of the remarkable thing about these trees. So again, I got these trees in about 2009. That's what they were like when I got them in the nursery. That's how they've been sitting on, in my yard for 10 years almost, in that much soil. And I mean, they're out in full sun. These are right, they get sun all day long. And look at, there's hardly anything in there. Now, when I've repotted them in decent soil, they started, you know, producing again tighter growth. But the thing that struck me is, man, look at these gnarly, you know, there's aerial roots. Now there's some dead stuff in here we're going to remove. But there's a style in bonsai called Niyagari, the exposed root style. We clean this up, we start whacking this and get a little crown developing right in here. That's a done tree. I mean, it is all this character here. Now, again, because this has been sitting here, all this dead wood is pretty deteriorated. So again, for the most part, some of these old aerials are going to take off here, because they're kind of just deteriorating anyway. And we're going to get back down to the living root on this Niagara style. And whoever takes this home is going to have a chance to plant this. So this guy, I want to save this chunk of dead wood here, but there's one other root coming off the back here, weaving through, that we don't need. And then we want to whack this guy back, because what we don't want to have here is we don't want to have a bunch of extension, because the more length we get here, the more it cancels this length out here. What we'd like to do right up here is just to put a little crown of foliage, just right here. So in order to do that, we got to whack it.
Question. For all this year, you didn't trim it at all? And it just survived like that?
Yep.
No
yep.
fertilizer or anything?
No, well, I mean, yeah, I've thrown a little fertilizer in here. You can see a little bit of my apex. And yeah, every once in a while they get long and I just kind of haircut them.
Is that just regular guava tree?
That's a Mexican guava.
I know.
So
regular
this,
Mexican
yes,
guava
yeah,
tree?
and it has about a 1-inch fruit. And you can see it does produce big leaves, but you can also see the leaves reduce as you keep pruning and stuff. So again, the idea for this is, or another thought for this is, a lot of times what will happen is, when I cut these, you'll get some more sprouts here. What I think could even be cool is if you got a sprout coming down off this, you know, and made like a little drop and, you know, something. This is going to be a little out of proportion, but in generally, if you saw something, you know, come and drop off of this even, you know, that could be kind of cool. And you'd start putting something that would draw your eye into this part of the root mass. But, you know, this, you could probably, whoever takes this home, could probably take it home, go and stick it right in a bonsai pot right now. I mean, because again, there's not much to do. And then what I'd probably do after that is next spring when it starts to push, maybe then actually get some real soil into it. I'm going to do also on this guy, since I made such an aggressive cut, I am going to put a little bit of cut paste on this. Sometimes when I realized I was going to become a bonsai teacher, I was encouraged by some of my other teachers and that. But when I realized I was going to do this, one of the things that struck me is I'm going to be asked about materials of all kinds of varieties. And as a teacher, I should at least have some sense of you know, what people need to know about them. And so I've always looked at different materials. I've always looked at, you know, what else is available to us. And in some of these, you know, trees too, that sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and say, I'm going to try this, you know. And so like stuff like this, you know, if you can get stuff for less than $1, hey, you know, you don't feel quite so intimidated. It goes back to, again, with my bonsai buddy and myself, when we were buying like $1.99, $3.99 plants, it wasn't like, you know, we were getting these magnificent bonsai and we were trying to learn on them. No, we were learning on just anything. And, you know, again, it took some of the fears away, and it gave me kind of an open mind to look at something else. Now I'm going to put this one on the raffle too. So this has already been worked down. So you can see it, this trunk. It's still a little straight. I'd be pushing it. I'd probably take my suckers off. And again, get this down to somewhere about like this. But I'll let somebody else play with this guy. But I just want to show. And the thing about this is too, is like these guys, they all have some interesting dead wood on them. And so for a fruiting tree, you don't often see that quality. But again, there's some nice added elements to work with on here. So again, another one for the raffle. Now, I've got a couple other things to talk and show. what we have here, this is a dwarf eugenia. So eugenia are very common as hedges. You'll see hedges in all kinds of locations. They actually can be quite tall. One of the common things of eugenia you'll see is they get a scale in the leaf. So you'll be walking by a eugenia hedge and you'll see all these kind of dimples and warts, and if you look under the underside, it's scale. In a bonsai application, we can prevent that from happening, and I don't seem to have too much trouble. Now again, you'll see from Friday, you'll see some burn in here. These are out, this was getting midday sun, afternoon shade. Well, it was hot enough by midday that my top started to fry on this. But for this guy, we don't really care. This you can see it bushed out, and so it's ready for a pruning anyway. Now in the years I've had this, these were some trees. There was a nursery in Los Angeles, in the San Fernando Valley. It was run by an old Japanese guy. It wasn't really a bonsai nursery, but he had a lot of landscape stuff that he maintained. So I don't know, it's probably about 8 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. The nursery went out of business, and all of a sudden there were like a couple hundreds of these pop up on the market. And so this guy, he just kept pruning these small and just kept keeping them tight. And so again, they developed nice woody trunks, nice bases. There's some interesting movement. You can see they bud out like crazy everywhere. And so, and you can see, you know, where big chunks were taken off to redirect the growth. So they can make some pretty attractive trees. And for a beginner, it's really an easy tree, because the minute you just start pruning these, they just start budding. Again, it's a hedge material. So the more you prune, the denser it gets. With these guys, one of the challenges is it could get so dense that you lose some of the structure that would make you think it's a tree. It'll start looking like a shrub. So what I do with this guy is, again, I've just kind of come in at various times, and I just am shaping this purely by form. And so what I'll do is I'll just trim this to its kind of pads and stuff, and I'll do this 2 or 3 times a year. Just be aggressive each time. But then, maybe one of those times, I'll come in, and after I do my haircut, I'll actually come in and start cleaning out some of the garbage, some of the crisscrosses, some of the stuff going in wrong directions. So I do want my bonsai to have a ring of truth to them. I want them to have a naturalness. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm looking to keep them shaggy and kind of unkempt. No, my naturalness that I'm talking about is, does it have the kind of spacing and stuff that evokes the sense of an old tree? Does it have the kind of branch to twig structure that when you follow it, it's believable? Do the branches and the structures, do they grow in the directions that trees typically grow? So if you think about it, again, and this really goes back to one of my earlier statements about how a lot of what we do, we learn our basic techniques, but then a lot of what we focus on from that point on is the materials we want to work toward in bonsai. So with this little tree, now we've got it shaped, now we can go in and now we can clean. But then part of this is you know, what's the pattern of growth? So do you ever stop to contemplate why trees take the forms they do? It's all about light. So at the high latitudes, up in the taiga, near tundras, you know, the Canadian Shields up in northern Siberia, the shape of the trees, think of them, they're all these columnar spruces. That's because at high latitudes, much of the year the sun is at a very low angle. So a columnar tree allows light to penetrate at all zones, so all branches stay healthy. Think about the tropics. You know, the tropical sun it never dips much below, you know, about a 60-degree angle in certain parts of the world. So a columnar tree with the light coming above, the lower branches would not survive. So think of your tropicals. They have the broad, shallow canopies. You get your lowland banyan shapes, but even in high elevation tropicals, if you're in the foothills of the Andes, 12,000 or more feet, you're still in a tropical zone. Those trees go up several hundred feet, they break through the canopy, and then they broaden out. And that solar panel is designed to capture all of that high angle light. So, when we're working on our trees, and again, this is addressed to beginners, one of the things you look at, one of the things you're going to learn is what are the patterns of growth that make a tree look like a tree? Well, one of it is acute angles. When your branches divide, they don't divide in obtuse or odd angles. They don't divide at right angles. They divide at narrow angles. So like when you've got a branch that sprouts out and puts multiple sprouts, you're going to have like a whole fan of little twigs in there. Well, when you look in your tree, you're looking at this radiating pattern, and what you're doing is, if something is growing backwards toward the center, that isn't part of that tree reaching out toward light. So that would be something automatically say, okay, I can take that one off because it doesn't ring true to nature. Verticals, again, same thing. In nature, a vertical comes up and then the weight lays it over. So what you get are these arcs. They don't stay a straight line. But in bonsai, the verticals don't get long enough, don't get enough mass to where they get drawn down like this. They just push up straight. The other thing is verticals oftentimes buttress up where they emerge, so you get a lump forming. So and the more they grow, the more they need that support, and all of a sudden you get these lumps out in the tips of your branches where you're expecting them to be fine and tapered. So those are the ways you look at some of your structure. Is it radiating from the center out? Is it acute angles, building to acute angles? Are my lines, do I have compression in spacing to where, again, in my twig zone, the spacing is tighter? So on a tree like this, again, you come through one time and you go, okay, I got some garbage down here. This is coming the wrong direction. I've got a base sprout here. Here's some inside curved sprouts. We can get rid of these guys. They don't really contribute. Got a nice low branch here, but he's coming out a slight, ooh, there's a little snail. Coming out slightly wrong direction. Here we got a little bit of clustering, we can get rid of that. I'm also looking for redundancy. So if I have a branch in a spot, do I have a branch right below it or right above it that just is doing what that guy is supposed to be doing? If that's the case, I can take them off. So some of these branches, the angles they break off the trunk are not very good. They're kind of ugly, But so this branch, see how it comes out, and instead of coming straight out, it just comes across the trunk? That isn't natural, because if a branch is seeking light, when it breaks from the trunk, it's going this way. It's not going to it's not going to do this. Nature is trying to be the most efficient. So when you get something like a weird angle coming off, you go, okay, well, can I put a wire on it? Well, if I put a wire on it, it's directly under this branch, so I don't need it. So you start looking at what's going on in the tree, and you start looking at some of the relationships that are forming in there. So here, we'll tighten this guy down. I want to make a little more of a set pad at this level. And we've got a few places here. Let's cut this guy back a little bit. And we got a big cluster of verticals here, so let's get rid of a bunch of these. We've got another thing that happens. Sometimes you'll come out to the tip of a branch, and what will happen is you'll notice that the branch has been pruned to the left. And then if somebody doesn't pay attention, they'll prune and another bud will break to the left. And all of a sudden you can have your branches chasing around the tree. So one of the ways to check yourself is if you've got a branch breaking off to the left, prune it to a leaf that's pointed back to the right. That's called directional pruning. And again, it's very predictable. That the vein on the leaf is the direction that the bud sitting at the base of the leaf is going to go. So whenever you've got a broadleaf tree, all you do is you look at the main vein of your leaf, and if you cut to that leaf, the bud then that will activate will grow in that direction. It's that predictable. And if you really pay attention to that, you can build fine twig structures without ever putting a wire on a tree. You know, you can. All trees still need wire typically at some point, but you absolutely can get away with it. Now, a little cleanup on this guy. Let's clean this old cut stub here. And let's do a little bit of other shaping here. Now, we come up to this spot, big bar right in here. So let's just get rid of that guy. Because what we can do is, see, we can pull one of these other branches down to that level. So I'm not too worried about creating a space there. Now let's open some of this other stuff up. Because see what's happened up in the top? From all my repeated prunings here, the top is nothing but a whole mass of little vertical lines. It forms a nice crown, but unfortunately there's a little too much going on in there. And I think one of the things we probably are going to want to do is maybe change some of that crown anyway. So again, let's get rid of this guy. And bottom branch coming right off of here we don't need. And again, let's change our profile here a little bit tighter. Okay. Ooh, now I saw something. All the time, here's something that happens a lot. This tree, just by default, when this big branch was taken off here, that kept being the easiest view into the tree. And so it was almost kind of automatic to start assuming that was the front. Well, now that I'm in here, look at all of a sudden the movement of this trunk from that angle. See that? See how you see from this angle it gets kind of straight right in here? And from this angle, there's a curve. Truthfully, this tree, I was going to come and just cut this off right here. And just say, okay, somebody can make a cutting out of this, and we've got this better tree down below. But with this angle, I think we've got a better tree here. So I'm going to do some other changes on this guy. We're going to get rid of all this little stuff. We got that. Ooh, excellent. Now I've got a couple of heavy guys up here. Save that one. So we've got a real heavy guy coming off to the back. Eliminate that just because it's so heavy. And then we got this one heavy guy coming off to the side here. Now, there's cuttings here. Again, that to me is a useful cutting. It's already got all the qualities of a tree line. It's got movement, it's got taper, it's got segments of growth, and the segments, if you notice, they compress. They get shorter as you get out to the end. So this would be a little piece that I would clean up the bottom here. I'd set this as a cutting because in another year, this might go into a 2-inch line or is beginning of a training. Again, we got to get this proportion set better on this. So we're going to make the drastic one here. And again, we're getting rid of some bad proportion here. Again, I'll put a little piece of wire on this guy to show where those branches really belong. Oh man, this is so much better. A tree here. Maybe I'll take that one back home. That's always nice. You know, too often we have less than good surprises. So every once in a while when we get into a tree where you get a good surprise, it makes it even more fun.
What wire are you using?
I'm using, this is probably a 2.5 aluminum.
Should all beginners use aluminum?
I think it's much easier to learn on, yes. Yeah, it's so much more forgiving. You know, I've started this year especially trying to get more of my volunteers at the Huntington working more in copper. And it's a challenge. What's really interesting though is when you see somebody work with, you know, working with copper and then they go back to aluminum, aluminum gets so easy to use in that sense. But yes, aluminum is much more forgiving. Now, here's a little wire tip. When you wire, it's always a puzzle. You got to figure out, you know, your path and stuff. Here's one little trick to help solve a common wiring problem. And that is, sometimes like here, I'm coming to a fork. Well, this single wire can only go out on one of the two tails of the fork. But we might have to come and add a second wire to do the second tail of the fork. So I'm right-handed, I naturally wire toward the right. Well here, when I come to this fork, what I'm going to do is I'm taking my wire and applying it to the fork on the right. So if I'm wiring to the right, you come to a fork, stay to the right. If you're wiring to the left, you come to the fork, take the left fork, because then what we're able to do is we're able to lay a fine piece of wire over the top and find our path on these branches. If you pick the other one, you have to bring your wire underneath, and typically we're trying to bring our branches down, and that wire won't provide the tension. If it's underneath, when you bring the branch down, the wire is pressing in. When you release on the branch, the wire loosens up. When you're coming over the top, you press the wire in, and when you bend it down, it's already pressed in, and so it'll hold it. So again, if you pay attention, you can kind of see those places coming up and anticipate where you might have to, you know, plan for your next wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop this guy. We're going to drop this guy. We're going to open up that front a little bit more. Ooh, yeah. Finer one. I got a fine wire to do this guy. What's moving more, the wire or the branch? Wire. That won't hold. So again, that little test, it's very useful. Well, at this time of the year, this tree has already gone through its late spring thickening, so it should be able to stay on here probably till Labor Day. But what's going to happen is, since we took so much off of this guy is really going to pop out again. It's going to grow pretty aggressively. So this little notch designates the front. So see where now, instead of just kind of a mass, now we actually have some structure defined. So again, this will fill, this back branch will fill. So this guy, again, is going to be more compact, but look at my branch patterning from the top now. Notice every branch radiates out at a slightly different angle. So again, now we got everything set up where it's not just form, but now we're actually addressing structure. So again, somebody gets to take that guy home too. Pardon?
10 minutes.
Okay. I'm just probably do less work and a little more talk, a couple others. This is a dwarf myrtle, dwarf myrtus. The thing about these guys is you can find these in the nursery too, but boy, if you ever find anything bigger than that in the nursery, you're lucky. So what will happen is some of these myrtus, they're available out of the urban landscapes. And so this was a 20-year-old hedge that I dug about 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. I got a call. I have a friend in the construction business, and they do remodelings, and they called me and said, gosh, we're working on this house, we're reworking the pool. They've got a 20-year-old boxwood hedge. Well, I called a couple guys, went out there, and it wasn't boxwood, but it was the dwarf myrtus. And these really make interesting trees because the foliage is so compact. They like the heat. They can be whacked hard. These were just literally dug as stumps. I grew them out in pure pumice, and again, just kind of been clipping and growing for the most part. But then finally, this year I just said I got to get them out of the pumice. I was starting to just have the issues, so I got them into my regular bonsai soil. Interesting, in some cases I had to recut the roots. But the trees, in some cases, some of these stumps almost went like a second collect because we didn't cut them tight enough the first time. So I cut them the second time, boom, they blew out. So this guy, what I was kind of going to focus on this is, again, some of these hedge-type plants, what happens is you almost get too much budding, too much sprout. So on a tree like this, the thing that you have to do, you'll notice this doesn't always hold its structure. So I've cut things, left branches, and the branches didn't necessarily always hold, but I always got stuff sprouted off the trunks. So the frustrating thing about these guys is you start working on any kind of structure and you prune it and the branch dies and now you got to start with the sprout. Part of it is because of all the mass budding. So when you get like everything pushing in one place at once, the competition for energy makes everything stay small. And you don't get thickening, you don't get hardening. So this guy, the focus here would be to come in where you got multiple sprouts and start just designating, okay, I got that guy, I don't need a vertical back here, I don't need this guy right here. I can use that guy, but I don't need that one then. Where does this guy come? He's coming right off the bottom, another right off the bottom, another right off the bottom. One coming right out of the crotch here. Another one coming right out of the little inside of a curved spot, so we don't need that. So, what I did here is, right just in this one little branch area on top, I cut 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces, and I left 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's another little one kind of coming off the back here that I would grow this way to fill this space. So on some of these trees, when you collect them, or when you do your repots, you like to let that growth push to regenerate your new root mass. But typically then your first step is, you actually have to come in this mass, and you have to start carving out your branches. Now, by taking this other stuff away, by allowing now this guy to shoot, and even allow secondaries to come here, now I can get that to thicken. It's not going to just stay like a little fine hair branch there. So that also, when you do stuff like this, it prevents this from happening. It prevents just non-activation. Because now what you've got is you've got sap pull. So like when this gets thick and I reduce it, I'll probably make sure I've got some leaves so I don't go through a withdrawal. So on a couple of these guys, what I did is they got really bushy and I just went and whacked them to sticks. And again, what I learned on these guys is you get them sprouting everywhere on the trunk but you don't necessarily get them sprouting on the branches. So what can be frustrating is if you're constantly having to regrow your branch system. That's one of the things at the Huntington, we even changed one of our practices. All our cypresses, our bald and Montezuma cypresses, we used to do much harder pruning. Over a year ago, I changed. I said we will only trim back to where there's secondary growth. And in that year and a half, we've gotten more twigs developing in our cypresses than we had in the 20 years prior to that. We would always have to regrow our twigs. We've got twig mass now because we're much more respectful of holding foliage. So this guy, again, if you get, like again, this applies to this eugenia too. If you get these shrub type materials that give you mass budding, one of the things you really have to do is you have to select and pick your lines and develop your individual lines. I had another one of these at home that I was going to bring, and I thought, no, I'll just show on this one. But it shows where I've cleaned it out and got a better distribution. But again, this guy in the heat, this produces little white flowers and little black berries, so it also gives you some interesting color. It also has an exfoliating bark that gives you wonderful model colors. And, you know, so in late winter, the oranges, the greens, the rust and stuff, that bark will kind of flake off and will just about bloom. So one final thing I wanted to just bring up here, because we should all maybe be looking for something like this. And again, I found something like this a little while ago. This is a Texas Ranger, Texas Sage. So I have a xeriscape in my front yard, and we've got a couple of these. One of the cool things about these is during the summer, about every 2 to 3 weeks, they come in a mass pink floral bloom. And they're like tiny orchids. They're the ones on my landscape are just loaded with flowers. Again, this is not a tree you see used in bonsai that much, but it's a pretty tough tree. So I've had this for a couple of years. Again, I found this at just some local nursery way out near Riverside, and I don't know, it wasn't that expensive. But the trunk is really nice. One of the things that these guys get, they're kind of like pomegranates. When you start pruning these, a lot of times you'll notice where pruning has been done, branches will develop on one side but not the other. So there's always a lot of sap withdrawal. So what happens is you start seeing these, they start developing these muscles and twists like a pomegranate. The one I have one of the ones I have in my landscape, it's just a spiral. I mean, it will develop that naturally. Now, the other thing about this is I wasn't real sure about working with these, so I've been a little bit careful. But now, you'll see, as we get into the heat, you see the budding in here. So this would be a tree, I would just whack the heck out of it right now and let this guy sprout out. I know we're out of time, so maybe take that one back and experiment and bring it back at another point. But don't hesitate in looking for something different like this. Again, my experience with these in the landscape encouraged me to give this a try as a bonsai. They're pretty stiff. I don't know how wireable they are. They also seem like if you kind of coax them, they'll pull out of their socket, and so their connection might be a little tenuous. But if we can get them to bud, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to just force mass growth down low. But bark texture is nice. Again, root mass, and because of this trend toward drought tolerant stuff, this is the kind of stuff you're probably going to start seeing in nursery work. And so again, don't walk by it. The one thing I'd probably say is, since it is a native to the Southwest, I would do any potting on this in the fall. So I'm going to take this out of the nursery again. It's been in here a couple of years, but this fall I'm going to do a major repot on this and see how well it takes to root prune and stuff. I know some folks in Arizona that have these and grow them as bonsai, but I really don't know anybody in California.
What is the name of it?
Texas Ranger or Texas Sage. Okay? So, some different things to think about for some of you new folks. A whole way of looking at bonsai probably different than we thought before, because suddenly we're not looking at traditional stuff. This is a Myrtus compacta. or Myrtus communis is also its common name. Okay? All right, thanks for having me, guys.